This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, August 16th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornital, back with you alongside Mike Hogan, a.k.a. at DRF Formulator, not from the DRF offices in New York, but from his posh home in Forest Hills, New York. How are you today, Mike?
I'm doing okay. I'm home with a sick 3-year-old, but I think all will be okay.
I think we can all relate to that. Anything serious going on? Just like sniffles? No. What are we dealing with here?
Yeah, pretty much. Just a little cough, a little, not quite right.
Jonathan
Kitchen,
how
it is.
I do know how it is. Jonathan Kitchen back in Texas. He should be back on the show soon, hopefully as soon as Friday, though that may project to be another travel day for him. We'll get him back on at some point. We will, in his stead, later on in the show, bring in not one but two frequent guests of the podcast, both coming off huge performances at the Battle of Saratoga last weekend, talking, of course, about Scott Carson and Paul Shurman. But before we bring them in, there were just a few things I wanted to chat about generally from last weekend. Let's start, Mike, with the Arlington Million. Have to say, folks, it's not redboarding when you gave out all the winners. It pays to listen to the DRF Players Podcast sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, you could have also alternately just bet Florent Giroux in all those races, and then listen to our pick for the million, because that was basically it right there, right?
We should have had another contest player actually factors into that equation. Doug Bradar, Flo's agent, accomplished contest player himself. Had the pleasure of hanging out with him the other day. Did a fine job getting Flo on some live mounts on the Million Day. That's for sure. What was his final tally?
I think he had 5 wins. I mean, he didn't win the million, but he won the other 3 graded stakes. So, what do they say? Florent doesn't ship just for the frequent flyer miles.
But what were your thoughts in general on the million card? Any performances stand out in particular?
Well, first of all, I was just surprised to see an Arlington Million card where it wasn't, pissing rain.
Can we say pissing on the podcast?
I don't know. I just did. So
we'll go
if it fits, I think we can.
I know Marcus made so many excellent predictions on the show. Gave us he cold-watered many horses who didn't run. Pointed out several live runners. The one area where Marcus fell down on his face, and he was just relaying others' information, of course, but was that whole bit about the 2 inches of rain.
Well, as a meteorologist, I think Marcus is a fantastic handicapper, put it that way. But yeah, it was, it looked like a beautiful day. Obviously, I wasn't there in person, but I'm just so conditioned to expect miserable conditions at Arlington for Million Day. It looked beautiful, and the races were fantastic, exciting races throughout. We all liked Mondialiste, and every once in a while you're actually right about something, so that was kind of nice.
I can't recall another time, even going back to the Matt Bernier era of the DRF Players Podcast, where everyone on the show liked the same horse and at a decent price, and the horse ran. So that was
right.
That was nice.
Right.
Speaking of weather, not to leave Arlington entirely, we can loop back there if you want. We'll just free flow this, Mike. But
sure.
When you're mentioning weather and nice weather, made me think about the Spapocalypse we experienced at Saratoga Racecourse. I've never seen anything like it, and I've seen my share of Saratoga storms. I've seen mattresses blown off of second-floor decks into 3 yards down. I've seen sheets of rain, the likes of which you're in for 3 seconds, and you can't tell the difference if you jumped in a swimming pool. This was a special storm. The worst of it coming actually after the cancellation occurred. We were holed up in what I call the secret spot in the Shake Shack area, and we were just hanging on for dear life. Susan wasn't up here this weekend. She was getting ready to drive down to Cape and Springs in West Virginia, where her family spend a week every summer, and I basically gave her my goodbyes just in case, as the lightning flashes were coming all around and the trees were exploding on the grounds at Saratoga. It was some seriously scary stuff. Were you aware of what was going on?
Only peripherally. I mean, it wasn't too bad down here in the city. I mean, obviously, I knew that they canceled the card, but my family was in town. I wasn't actually watching the races live, so I had no idea exactly what was going on. But boy, it sounds like end times kind of stuff.
It was crazy. It was crazy. I was glad for Jonathan that he'd gotten out ahead of Dodge. He had a chance to hang out and to get some family time in, going to the movies with his son, and understandably decided to take that chance, that opportunity to do that instead of hanging around in dodgy weather in Saratoga. But yeah, we were stuck up there. We had a good day. Got to hang out with a couple of different podcast listeners. Special shout out to Pete Dressens, the current leader on the NHC rookie tour, who was up there, had himself a heck of a day, could, I think, buy an automobile with what he won. And we just sort of coincidentally, it's not like we handicapped together, but ended up on a lot of the same horses. So we had some fun routes at the TV and a great day. And Peter he's formally thrown his hat in the ring to be considered the best dressed man in racing, an honor I've currently bestowed upon Steve Bick. But given the natty attire he was busting out on Saturday, I'd say he's absolutely got to be in the conversation. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to him again soon. A really fun day, and if you're going to have a day, if you're going to lose a day at Saratoga, honestly, I would pick the day where 90% of my attention was on Arlington anyway, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it would have been nice to see if we were right. We were pretty right about Arlington. It would have been nice to see if we were right about the 4-star Dave, but I guess we get another chance to tackle that one this weekend.
Well, and not only that, Mike, we'll get a chance to tackle it this time with you in tow. Sounds like you're going to be making the trip up to join me at the seminar I'm doing at Ciro's at 10:45 on Saturday.
That's correct. I will be up there. I may even have a special guest.
Fantastic.
And it sounds like from what you were implying about there being a travel day for Jonathan, might we see a Jonathan Kinchen sighting as well?
There are rumors. You know, he's sort of like the shadow. You know, no one knows where Jonathan will appear next. But it'd be fun to have a live podcast going on at Ciro's if we can. We'll take a look and hopefully get that going on. We've been having a lot of fun with these shows at both Ciro's and at that pavilion tent at Naira. I've been doing some of them as well. Last weekend we had Steve Davidowitz and Nick Tamaro and Travis Stone on schedule for Saturday right now. Mike Beer's going to be joining us, Mike Hogan joining us, and I'm also going to, speaking of Steve Beck, I'm going to try to drag him in for the mix if he doesn't head out to go to the Pacific Classic. Boy, what a race that Pacific Classic is shaping up to be based on that news from this week, Mike. Tell any listeners who might have had their head under a rock what we're going to be expecting out in Del Mar over the weekend.
Well, it looks like we're going to get Beholder joining California Chrome in Dortmund. Unfortunately, Melatonin is sick and will not make the race, but it still looks like it's going to be a fantastic race. Certainly from the West Coast standpoint, perhaps a preview of what we might see in the Breeders' Cup Classic, all things being equal. It's shaping up to be a really fantastic weekend between that out at Del Mar, the rescheduled 4-star Dave, and of course the Alabama, where we've got Songbird, who may even be the best 3-year-old in training right now.
It's going to be an incredible weekend of racing, as these summer weekends tend to be. I'll bet you Beholder staying the course and heading out there might just tip the scales against Steve joining us. But we'll try to make things happen. Just for folks who might be coming to Saratoga, just to let you know the rest of my seminar schedule. Friday, August 26th, I'm going to be back at Ciro's. The booked guests as of now, Mike Watchmaker and the aforementioned Matt Bernier. That's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to make Bernier work double duty that weekend. Saturday, Mike, I'm going to give you full credit for this because it was your idea that I think I'm going to steal, because I've already been assigned Mr. Bernier for the Saturday show. I spoke earlier in the meet to the Rotundos and Lee Davis, who are around. I think it's got to become the full-blown horse players reunion at Upper Travers Day at Saratoga. Got to figure out the time of that one, but that should be a lot of fun as well. I doubt with your busy weekends, Mike, you've had any chance to check out any of these seminars. I've been periscoping them as well. But we've had some fun and some lively conversations over there.
Sounds great. Yeah. I mean, steal my ideas all you want. It's all about the end result, not about the credit. So,
and hopefully we can maybe, based on the conversations, maybe we can figure out a way to make it work as a future webinar that we can do demonstrating some DRF stuff, because all those folks obviously have a connection to DRF, and there's got to be a way to get them, maybe doing a DRF tournaments webinar or something like that. I know folks have missed the webinars the last few weeks. It's been so hard being so crazy up here, but obviously we'll be getting them back on the schedule too. And I hope to have a final seminar to announce for Labor Day weekend. Still working on pulling the strings as to the where and why of that. Basically the idea, it's to do it much more podcast style than it is typical seminar style. It didn't make sense to me ahead of Talking Horses, where the folks already do such a good job of running through every individual race on the card. So we do it a little more conversational. Typically, I'll ask just a general racing or meet-related question of each guest, and then we go through, and folks will give us maybe one or two spot plays on the card or tell us how they're planning on attacking the card. In a way, I think it's good for novice players especially to hear how more experienced players actually think about a card in terms of how to bet and where to attack, because it's not like anybody in the world on a 10-race card puts 10% of their bankroll on each race. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that's what most of us do is we sit down and we say, okay, who are we excited about playing today? Who do we want to make sure if they run well or win, that we're in a position to capitalize? That's at least how I start out, and then I build my bets and my plays around that. It's I rarely start with, okay, race one, and then go race two, and then go race three. And I'm guessing a lot of people approach it the same way I do.
We had a good wagering strategy conversation. I actually felt kind of bad about how it turned out, but I think my advice was good. Jonathan had left, as I mentioned, for the Million Day. He was in transit and needed help getting a bet down, and he wanted to bet. I don't want to give numbers here, so we'll just say he in one race wanted to bet 4 chips total, and he was like, I'm going to bet 2 chips on Beach Patrol. First he said, I'm going to bet 4 chips on Beach Patrol to win. And then he said, no, I'd rather do 2 chips to win on Beach Patrol and 2 chips in a cold exacta Beach Patrol Long Island Sound. He obviously saw the race the same way I did. And so I said to him, I don't think that makes sense. You should probably do 3.5 chips to win Beach Patrol, half a chip on the cold exacta. And then he said, forget it. I'm just going to do 4 chips on Beach Patrol. Of course, he won, but his original bet, he would have won a lot more money. Still, do you understand the logic of what I was trying to get across to him, knowing that his main opinion in the race was Beach Patrol and Long Island Sound was just sort of the add-on?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's exactly what I was getting at. What's your strong opinion? If your strong opinion is those are the 2 best horses by far, then start looking to the exacta. If it's first, I want to bet this one horse, don't immediately go into the exotics. That's my approach, at least.
The more, I think you put it very well, the more you can have the bet that you make reflect your exact opinion of a race, the better off you're doing. I didn't feel bad for very long, however, because he then proceeded to bet a rather sizable C. Khaleesi Mondialiste straight double. And when I was walking out of the track on Saturday, that being his runner for the day, I understood why they call him Johnny Stacks. Let's just put it that way.
That's nice. Well, it's too bad I missed all that, but I had fun down here with the family.
Oh yeah, it was a good summer weekend to take care of all that, to take care of whatever you need to do. Now we have a few more minutes before we bring these guys in. Is there anything else you want to talk about Arlington, or do you want to go back and close the loop on the Hall of Fame discussion? I feel bad we gave such short shrift to Steve Asmussen and Ramon Dominguez getting in last week, two Hall of Famers. But let's face it, this is a racing podcast, and racing podcasts were basically made to discuss Rachel Alexandra and Zenyatta, or so it seems.
That's right. Well, the one thing I'll say about Arlington before we move on is, though Beach Patrol only beat Long Island Sound by a head maybe, Beach Patrol was by far the best in that race. I mean, at least from my viewing, Florent Giroux rode like he never thought he was going to lose. He was wide the whole way around. He didn't care. He had that whole race measured out, and that was just at least my take on it. But I don't know if you have a disagreement, anything to add.
No, I would agree. I thought that I didn't think it was much in doubt. I'm glad I did decide to forgive Long Island Sound. Obviously, much improved effort, but Beach Patrol is who that's the one to take out of it. I would think. I haven't done the full race review to see if there's something in there, something clever in there to come up with for the next time these horses reoppose, but everything you said about the race makes sense to me.
One other note about something you sort of poo-pooed a little bit on Friday, and then you backed off once I gave a little bit of my reasoning for it. The 3-year-olds, the Aidan O'Brien 3-year-olds, Long Island Sound ran a very, very good race and finished second against 3-year-olds. The other 3-year-olds that ran against older, all out of the money, right?
Yeah. I think that's that. I think. Well, like did Deauville run third?
You might be right, actually. Now that I think about it, I think Deauville might have run third.
But I just don't know what those 3-year-old fillies. It was also just like how much the best. Let's talk about C. Khaleesi for a second.
Yeah.
I can't. What was she on the board? 4 to 5. One ran like 1 to 9. I mean, just that powerful move around the turn and just sustained run to the finish. As painful as the New York, I guess it was for me, that effort was positive. That set a lot of things, a lot of bad luck. It was made up for with what C. Khaleesi was able to do for me over the weekend. It was a good result and a stylish performance by an excellent runner.
Yeah, and I thought, of course, she was the best, but I was very impressed with Zepesa's effort setting the pace. Well, not really setting the pace, stalking the rabbit who spit the bit pretty easily on the back stretch. She took over. She kicked clear a little bit. It didn't ever look like C. Khaleesi was going to lose, but Al's gal drafted in behind. Zepesa maybe ran the second best race in there, I think.
I'll take that into consideration upon review. I did think she was maybe a little close to the rabbit in the early stages of the race. I remember that thought flashing across my brain as I was watching it. Apologies for not doing more Arlington tape work in advance of the show today. Had to get out for another run. I've got this half marathon October 8th. It's going to be here before I know it. I got the clockers got me today. More of like a C+ maintenance move kind of thing. I think I was flattered with my run last week by workmate Kinchin having all the problems he had, but I did get back in one piece in here in time for the show, even if I didn't get all the work done I was hoping to in advance of today's podcast. Apologies for that.
That's no problem. I mean, it sounds like you don't want to leave it all out on the track in the morning anyway. There's no point in being a morning glory. You got to save something for the race.
Absolutely. And when your goal of the race is to just get across the finish line, that changes things a little bit too. All right, now on to that other business.
Yeah. I just the one thing I wanted to say, I didn't get a chance because we were running a little short last week. Actually, we ran long even still. But I wanted to talk about, in writing the article about Rachel and Zenyatta, you start thinking, okay, which one do you prefer? Who do you like better? Which one is the greater filly? I don't know I still don't know if I can answer who's greater. But thinking more about their career, ideologically, Zenyatta is the kind of horse that I want to continue racing. She embodies the sort of thing I want from my racehorses. 3 years, you want your racehorses, you want your superstars to keep racing. You want them to put together the best efforts and then come back the next year and do it again. And then come back the year after that and defend, that regardless of whether or not she won, regardless of whether or not she would have beaten Rachel, that's the sort of campaign that I started, and look, there are some that say, she didn't really ship. She didn't really have to. She did when the Breeders' Cup was out at Churchill, but for the other races, mostly they were in Southern California, so she stayed there. That was her goal. And no knock certainly on Jess Jackson, no knock on the Asmussens, but the way it was done, she was a relatively reasonable yearling purchase. They kept her throughout, as opposed to somebody that developed another horse and then was bought as she was getting good. The Zenyatta story, I think, is the story that, as a racing fan, I want to say that's who I prefer. Does that make sense?
It does make a little bit of sense. I would say this. For me, the ideal campaign, not to take anything away from either one, but it's probably somewhere in between the incredible ambition of Rachel's 3-year-old year and the, I'm going to say it, passivity of Zenyatta's elder campaigns. Now, granted, I'm not really criticizing. The goal was always the Breeders' Cup. She easily could have won 2 of them. That's fantastic. It would be nice to have seen, maybe just a little more ambition, but then maybe she wouldn't have made those Breeders' Cups. You could easily argue it the other way. But for me, sort of the ideal campaign is probably between those two extremes in terms of ambition. But Zenyatta, obviously special and unique, and I think that played into how she had to be trained too. I don't want to name any names, but there's a lot of famous trainers who I think if they had Zenyatta, you would have never heard of her because of how unique she was physically. I think that a lot of other trainers' more aggressive techniques might have ended up dealing with an injury or certainly not been able to achieve the highs that they did. Unbelievable kudos to both teams there for what they were able to get out of those fillies. And I think they do, in a way, represent flip sides of the same coin, which is why it's so fun to talk about who would have won, which one was better, who you prefer, however you want to frame the question. It's a question we're going to continue to talk about for decades, the same way that you'll still hear people argue easy go over Sunday Silence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think right now we have one perhaps that we hopefully get to see soon enough, the Songbird versus Beholder, both of whom will be running this weekend, both of whom could very well meet each other. And I certainly hope they do. That's the other nice thing about it is in racing, you get another chance to have these superstars running at the same time. Potentially, if we didn't have Zenyatta and Rachel so recently, these could be the best two, 3-year-old filly and older mare in training at the same time that we've seen in a long time. So I love that sort of thing. The one other thing I'll say, and it's something that you mentioned a lot, it's partly what made me think about, Zenyatta versus Rachel. The way the Mosses and John Sheriff's approached Zenyatta was, like you say, they circled our goal, all things Breeders' Cup, whether it was the first year when she won the Ladies Classic or the next year's when she won the BC Classic or ran second, of course, in her final start. That was always the goal. They were very clear. They were circling that calendar, and everything that happened, even in January, February, April, whatever, it was all tracking back to that goal. In no knock on Jess Jackson and Steve Asmussen, but it was almost the exact opposite with Rachel. They bought her and they said, boy, they didn't think, okay, we're going to be buying a horse that we want to run in the Preakness, the Haskell, and then the Woodward against Older. They just bought and said, let's see what we've got and let's take it as far as we can. And, in a lot of ways, it was just as sporting, perhaps even more sporting. I just wish we could have seen a little bit more of the brilliance.
Yeah, sporting, I think you have to give to Rachel every day of the week and twice on Sunday. But I think in terms of overall achievement and what you prefer in terms of what you want to see out of your equines, I do think that's where you can make the Zenyatta argument.
Yeah. So, again, I don't have a definitive one, and, I'm going to stay on the fence here, but I just started thinking it almost becomes a little bit of an ideological question as a racing fan.
Well, one of the reasons I love, and I've told the story a million times about Jonathan with his tattoos, having each of them on his left arm, and telling that story to our friend and friend of the podcast, John Parada, and him saying, what is he, a politician? But the fact of the matter is we're all on the fence, so it's kind of appropriate.
Sure. Yeah. And look, it's okay to be on the fence when you've got greatness like that. You don't have to knock one at the expense of the, to celebrate the other.
As I like to say, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, you can love them both, but you go ahead.
As I like to say, why can't they both just be great? And now I'd like to welcome back to the podcast two very special guests who share a connection, who share several connections at this point. They really need no introduction if you're regular listeners, but just very quickly, we will bring in 2010 NHC Tour champion Paul Shurman. Paul, how are you?
Fine. Great, thanks. How are you?
Doing very well. And Public Handicapper founder and Battle of Saratoga winner, Scott Carson. Scott, what's up?
Not much. I'm still basking in the glow of the win.
Fantastic. Well, the first question I want to ask you guys is, it was my understanding, and you two can choose who answers this question, but it was my understanding that Paul was a bit of a mentor for you, Scott, in your contest play. Would either of you describe that description as accurate?
I would, absolutely. I mean, Paul has great opinions, and I think I've learned a little bit from him. Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, there have been times like when I've been in the lead of a contest and I've come up to Paul and said, "What do you think I should do?" And
I think not so much now, but maybe if I recall correctly, an aqueduct contest where we were talking strategy for a long time. Maybe that you were in the lead, and we were talking about the best way to play it. So I don't think he needs any. I think he's got the strategy down now.
Yeah, I actually do have to say, I remember I think it was the first time I ever qualified was at Arlington, and it was also a live bankroll contest. And I hit something really big about midway through the contest, and I was like, "Paul, what do I do?" And he gave me some advice, which I still remember to this day, and it was great advice, and it helped me. I think I ended up finishing second, but it helped me get that second place spot.
Don't hold out on us, Scott. Don't hold out. What was the advice?
I can't tell you. I don't know if Paul remembers, but
are you trying to just sell extra copies of The Winning Contest Player, a book that you're both featured in? Is that what you're doing there, Scott? Because I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, absolutely. You should absolutely get that book. Anybody who's just starting out, that'll save you a heck of a lot of experience. Save you like 3 or 4 years on the tour, I think.
Where did you guys first meet, Paul?
Well, I was talking about this with my brother and a few friends. That I believe it was probably 2004, 2005. I remember sitting with Scott at a Belmont tournament, which was still when they were still having it in the tent outside. So it was probably 2004, 2005. I first met Scott.
And the friendship just took off from there, I assume. I mean, in contests, for those who don't know, the tour, especially back then, was kind of a literal tour, right, where people would travel around to different contests. So once you sit with somebody at a table, there's in almost all instances, I'd say there's at least a little bond there. Would you say that's accurate, Scott?
Yeah, and I think also sometimes you meet people at your table, and that's how I met Ross Gallo, and he told me about his ultimate betting challenge, and I told him about Public Handicapper. He didn't even know about it, and he was like, "Oh, come on down to my contest." So like that was an instantaneous friendship, and then there are other times. I think with Paul, I probably sat with him a few times at different contests, and you eventually you start gaining, that bond starts building. So I think, that was probably a little bit more over a few contests.
So I want to talk about the emotions a few days out from the Saratoga contest. You guys, for those who don't know, ran 1-2. Both of you, I guess you were both in about 15th, 20th going into the last race, and then each hit the last, not knowing what the other had played, and then it was time for the waiting game. Paul, what were your emotions going in? You two were probably the two people who'd done the best in the NYRA contest without actually winning one. What was it like to be in that position, especially going heads up against a close friend?
Well, it's funny because he and I discussed who we liked before the race. We'd both hit the Gulfstream race before, and I think Scott had about $1,700 and I had about $900. And we were sitting at the same table, and I said, "Who do you like?" He said, "I like the 10 horse." And he said, "Who do you like?" "I like the 4. I didn't know how he was playing it, but at the time, the leader had like $5,000. So my goal was to bet combinations that would get me up to $7,000, keying my horse. So that's what I did. I played the 4 horse on top of 3 others for $100 exactas, and I put the balance $400 to win on the 4. When I placed the wager, the exacta wager, the horse, the exacta, the 410 exacta, which came in, was 4-1. So after I hit the race, I thought, that's $7,000. It should be good. I go up to Scott. I said, "I just hit that race." He goes, "So did I. I had a $500 exacta." I said, "What? $500 exacta?" And actually, if I was mentoring at that point in time, before he made that bet, I would have said, that's a terrible bet because it's overkill. And instead of the $500 exacta, he could have played two $250 exactas and still win the tournament. Of course, it worked out great for him because he collected $14,000. But two $250 bets would have done the same thing. But you blew me out of the water. Hopefully, I was holding on to second. So and I did.
That's great. Now, Scott, it's a great story that $500 bet was actually a hedge on your larger play or on your main opinion. Explain to listeners how that went down.
Okay, well, I have to say that I when Paul said he liked Light the Night, I liked him too. I really liked the horse, and I thought those were the 2 horses, absolutely, Seize and Light the Night. So, but at the same time, when I win one of these things, or when I do well, I usually do it by just wailing on my strongest opinion, which was the 10. I thought the 10 had the best chance of winning. So I, zeroed in on, I did 1,000 to win on Seize, and I did a $200 exacta Seize, Light the Night. That's the 10-4. Then I did a try with I love doing a try key, 1 horse over two others, because it doesn't cost that much. I did a $100 try key, 10 over 4 and 1. And the one I added, even though I couldn't tell if it was any better than any of the others, but Maggie had really liked the way it looked. So I mean that definitely affects my betting, her opinion. So I did a $100 try key, which was like another $200. So that was $1,400, and I still had $500 in my account. And I thought, what if something goes wrong here?
What could go wrong, right? What could go wrong? Horse players, we're familiar with that. What could go wrong?
The 4 could beat Seize. So I still had $555 in my account, and I just said, what the f-? I mean, sorry.
And here I thought we were going to get through a whole show without editing, Scott.
So I just did a 500. I figured I'd still have $55 in there. And that was it. I had no idea what it was paying. Right. I just thought that those are the 2 horses, so I might as well just, slam them.
You were as nervous as I've ever seen you going into that race. You seemed like you were on the precipice of something big. It seemed to me you were very confident in your opinion, and you just sort of had to get through the running of the race. But watching the race, your route was 100% focused on Seize. So after they crossed the wire, my first gut was that's not good for Scott. But then, when people quickly disappear after a race, a lot of times that means it's actually something really good. So I was hopeful for you. In any case, it definitely sounds like Naira's Maggie Wolfendale is going to be getting a very nice present upon the birth of her child from you, Scott Carson.
Absolutely. I got to take care of her because she helped me in many different races.
That's great.
I mean, not just that day. I'm talking about constantly. People start talking to me in contests, and I'm like, shh, I'm listening to Maggie.
It's very funny because even at contests and even at my local teletrack, when she gets on and speaks, people who are loud and boisterous and wouldn't otherwise keep quiet, the room is hushed. Everybody listens to her, and she's a great talent. She's unbelievable.
She's been doing a great job. The NYRA show in general, what I've been able to see of it, has been terrific. Available nationally via Fox Sports, of course, in New York on MSG. They're doing a great job, and Maggie, certainly one of the highlights of the coverage. And I kind of like that. You remember those old E.F. Hutton ads? I'm dating myself now for the younger listeners, but
right.
It's sort of the horse racing equivalent of the old E.F. Hutton ads. So that reminds me, we need to get her on the show at some point soon. Maybe, I'm sure she's nuts this meet, but maybe shortly thereafter. Mike Hogan's with us on the call too. Mike, I'm sure you have some questions for these guys. Scott, in particular, had a few instances where he used Formulator to great success during the contest. You got anything for these guys while I just continue to hog the conversation here?
Well, Scott, I know part of obviously the last race was what won it for you, but I think what put you into position was the race before that. Why don't you talk a little bit about what was it, that State Bred Stakes race on the turf? Who you liked in that race, how you landed on them, and how you got in position to end up taking it all down.
Well, yeah, and that's having the opinion in the 10th race was great, but I had to have some bankroll in order to capitalize on it. And I got that bankroll in the 9th race, which was won by a horse named Free and Clear, going 2 turns at a mile. And I think the real key with that race was that that was clearly a horse that liked distance, and a bunch of the other horses hadn't gone 2 turns yet, or if they hadn't gone 2 turns on the turf, and that includes the favorite, Frosty Margarita, who was like 7-5. The second choice, Louisville First, who's somebody Maggie really liked, a George Weaver horse, I believe, also hadn't gone 2 turns. And Free and Clear had just gone 2 turns and won at 17-1. I mean, I don't know if it was exactly 2 turns because it was a Belmont mile and 16th race, but it was. It looked like I never got a chance to look at the replay of the race, but it looked like the horse closed really well, and in its previous race, and another thing, so I'm looking at Formulator, and this is really interesting. It's sort of it's an interesting sort of counter opinion. I always go to the trainer patterns and look to see how they do at the track. And the trainer of that horse, Patrick Quick, was 0 for 5 over the last 5 years, and not a single horse even finished in the money.
At Saratoga?
At Saratoga. So, to me, that's like, okay, you're wrong. Just get off that horse, right? But the horse was being bet, and he opened at 6-1. He stayed there, and he ended up going off a little bit under 9-1. And so I had to figure somebody's betting this horse, and I liked the way he looked. So I did a $50 win on him, but I also did a $10 exacta box with Louisville First, who's the horse that Maggie liked the most. And then I also did a $10 try key, which, this is my favorite bet, a $10 try key or $100 if you've got the cash, where it's one horse over 2 others, and the one horse has to win, and the other 2 can come in either position. And that pulled out $2,500 for me. So it was $90 worth of wagering for $2,500 in cash.
Scott, actually, I'll ask Paul this first, but it's a concept that Scott helped you in the tournament the other day. Contest players have personality. Some are front runners who play wonderfully when they get off to a hot start and then can play with a lead. I'm not naming any names, but a great example of a front runner is a guy who's frequently co-hosting this podcast. Other players are known for the ability to play with a short stack, the sort of chip and a chair mentality. Mark Strife comes to mind. Tom Noon out in California comes to mind as guys who, as long as they have $100 left, they're still drawing live. Paul, where do you fit on that continuum, and what advice do you have for players in live bankroll tournaments playing with a short stack?
Well, in live bankroll tournaments, first of all, it's my theory is it's always easier to win just by placing a win bet. The horse I hit at Saratoga, I had $900 in my bankroll. If he was 8 or 9 to 1, it would have been a straight win bet for me to try to get to 7 or 8,000. The next best, if your bankroll is a little lower and that straight win bet won't get you where you want to be, then the exacta bet to me is better because you can actually plan out and plot out how you're going to get to that certain point. So I had $900. So again, my goal was to get to 7,000. So I played combinations that would get me to 7,000. If you have even a lower bankroll, then you are forced to play trifectas. Trifectas are not as certain because you never know what they're going to pay. There's no way to figure out exactly what the trifecta is going to pay, like you can with an exacta. So where do I fit? In the real money tournaments, I don't like to be in the lead or close to the lead because everybody's shooting for you. And in a contest where there are 200 entries, at least one person will have a winning combination that'll beat you. I like to be somewhere in the middle. I like to have a good amount of money to take shots at the leader, but to be in the lead, what do? Do you try to go from 5,000 to 10,000, or do you try to hold on to your 5,000? It's more difficult being on the lead in real money tournaments. In mythical money tournaments, you like to be in the lead because then you pretty much know what people can play, and you can protect yourself, and you know what the options are, and you know what can happen in every instance. In live money tournaments, you have no clue what's going to happen. If you're in the lead, you can be pretty certain that somebody like Scott will hit a huge exacta, or the day before, the guy who won hit a straight trifecta. So I like to be on the lead in mythical money tournaments. I like to have a bankroll, but off the lead in live money tournaments.
Scott, we talked about how you built up your bankroll, but you told me a great quote. I didn't get it in time to put it in the article, but your attitude after approximately the 7th race at Saratoga on Thursday. Do you remember the quote I'm talking about?
Yeah, and I think I said this out loud to Paul and Mitch, who I was sitting with, that I think I need to get a new hobby.
Where were you at that point?
I had $80. I hadn't cashed a ticket. If I did cash a ticket, it was like I broke even in a day and a half. So, my opinions, they stunk. But the one thing that I have to remember, and my takeaway from this contest is when you have one or for me, I'm going to find 1 or 2 races in any contest, especially live money, that I really feel very strongly about. And even if it's like the 5th race, that's the one that I have to make sure I go deep on. Because, like the Gulfstream 9th race, or the last race at Gulfstream, which was right before the last race at Saratoga, I didn't have that great of an opinion, but I felt like, let me try to build my bankroll, so I bet $600 on it. And it wasn't, I never had a great opinion on that race, but I had a great opinion on this race. So, if I were going to do it again, I would have skipped that Gulfstream race and had even $2,500 to go into this race. It was my favorite race of the day. The race before where I won $2,500, that kind of grew on me as the day went on. But I think, even like one time I won, I got second in the Keeneland live bankroll, and I built all my bankroll on the 5th race, and so people had to come and catch me, but that was the one I had all the opinion in, and that's where I did that, that magical try key with one horse over 2 others. So And you got to just make sure you go deep where your opinion is the strongest.
I think that's great advice for live bankroll play for sure. Mike, what else do you have for these guys while we have them? We got probably about 8 minutes left in the show here.
Well, Scott, I wanted to circle back to that ninth race where you mentioned you liked Free and Clear. One of the other, and you may not even been aware of this, one of the other angles that I like to look for is the scratch board. And trainer Patrick Quick had entered her 3 days prior in the open version of the same race. She was, of course, in the state-bred turf mile race for fillies in the race that you hit. 3 days prior, she was in the one open to fillies and colts. She was the only filly entered. She was 7-2 on the morning line. He scratched her to go in the filly race where she was a much higher price. Did you look at that? Does that factor into your wagering at all in terms of trainer intent, perhaps to offset that negative stat you saw with Quick at Saratoga?
Honestly, I don't think I've ever looked at the scratch board. I don't even know where that is.
Well, sounds like I'll have to show you. It's actually one of the nice features in Formulator. It's under the charts and graphs. You can take a look and see which horses had scratched since they last ran a race, and it gives you the reason, whether it was a vet scratch off the turf, a trainer scratch, a steward scratch. Sometimes you'll see a horse that was entered in for an allowance race was a vet scratch and now shows up plummeting in price, and there's no work since. Sometimes that can be a negative. But in cases like this, where a horse was entered in a similar race earlier and the trainer scratches to go in this spot, if let's say you were aware of that, would you factor that in at all in your handicapping? Or
I'll tell you, in 1997, I really liked Alphabet Soup in the Breeders' Cup Classic. And David Hoffman's entered him in both the Sprint and the Classic. And I was like, damn, if he's entering him in thinking about him for the Sprint, he must have some doubts about the Classic. So I didn't bet him. and he won at like 20-1. So I don't know. I think the more important thing for me is, aside from all the other factors, and this is a really critical thing for me in when I use Formulator, is I merge the workouts. And there's a nice breeze there at Saratoga that just looks like a nice, healthy breeze for the horse. That worked for Free and Clear, and it was even better for Light the Night, because Light the Night had been training at Fairhill, but came up to Saratoga and had a nice little gate work. And to me, that just means, okay, they're making sure that they're not vanning the horse up that morning and risking anything. They're getting them up there early, getting them familiar with the surroundings. And if the breeze is okay, then it means the horse is healthy. So, to me, that's a really critical thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I mean, those are the kinds of things that when the workouts aren't merged, when I'm looking at the paper, my eye has a hard time going back and forth. When it jumps out, I can often see, okay, there's a change in the work pattern. There's a change, considerably faster work. I'm kind of with you. Otherwise, to me, the works just become noise, or I lose them. I don't even notice them a lot of the time. And Paul, is it bittersweet at all to lose to a friend, or is it the kind of thing where it's like, well, if I'm not going to win, at least my good buddy won this one, or does it just even make you more competitive next time now that you've got a bunch of second place finishes in these contests?
I'm happy to come in second, and there's no defense in this game, especially in live money tournaments, and he made a great play, and I could have come in, fourth, fifth, or sixth, depending on what everyone else played. So I'm happy to come in second. I'm thrilled that Scott won. It's not really bittersweet. I would have been upset if I made a mistake or I missed something, but I played it the way I wanted to play it, and this is how it shook out, and it's fun. And I'm great. Scott won. I'm thrilled Scott won, and he's going to buy me a dinner, so that's even better.
Let me interject that to me, I've probably interviewed more professional horse players than pretty much anybody alive, at least in the United States. And that quote of Paul's to me just says so much, because whether you're a pro horse player or just a successful contest player, that ability to focus on the decisions that you make rather than the outcomes you receive, that separates winners from losers to me. I don't know if that's something you do consciously, Paul, or if it's just the way that you're wired, but I think it's critically important, and I wanted to underline it.
Right. No, if I'm happy with the way I played, then I'm happy, and I can't control what Scott did. I can't. A $500 exacta, called exacta. How do I beat that? Good for him, and good for anyone else. Last year, the winner of the Saratoga contest was brilliant. He played
Brett Wiener.
place horses all day long, and that was brilliant. So I admire
card.
that.
Just to clarify on that, also, it was a chalky looking card. He didn't see any big prices coming in. That was his read, Brett Wiener, and yeah, he just he got the lead, and he just sort of placed his way through, and his ability to identify what it was going to take on that day, that was also different. That was not a live bankroll contest last year. So that strategy made a ton of sense in that format, the same way that what Scott and Paul did this year made perfect sense. You have to, I don't think, Scott, let me ask you this. I don't think it pays to be too dogmatic in these contests. You have to kind of go with the flow and adjust based on not only the rules of each individual contest, but also what the sort of racing gods give you in terms of what you can bet on that day. Would you say that's right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes they're off the turf, and in both tracks or all three tracks, and then, I mean, I don't think I've ever won one of those, but but you can't let it ruin your day. You just have to roll with the punches. But let me say one thing about. I just want to say one thing about Paul. He is, he and Chris Larmy are like the two guys that scare me the most, and I will be at a contest sitting with Paul at the table, and he's not even anywhere in the top 20, and the last race goes off, and some 20-1 wins, and inevitably it turns out Paul hit the thing, and he finishes in the top 3. And he wins the trip to Vegas. So the fact that I actually eked this one out is like a huge accomplishment.
I wasn't really eking it out. I think you won by $8,000, but what you said, Pete, is correct. What you said is correct. It's what do the racing gods give you? Sometimes everybody's got the angles that they like. Everyone sees things differently and likes certain things. There are days when everything looks the same, and you find nothing that you love. Your angles that you like to play, none of these horses fit. So, I was lucky this day that I liked the horse that won in the last race, and we talked about why I liked it.
Yeah, let's tell people about that. It doesn't, because that angle, you were talking about specific data that had the horse running winning numbers as 2-year-olds, but it doesn't matter what speed figures you're using. This angle that you used applied. Why don't you tell people what it was?
Well, the angle is there's tremendous growth and maturity between 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, and again 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. This, like tonight, had run 4 times as a 2-year-old, and on my figures had numbers that would have won this race. The 2-year-old numbers would have won this 3-year-old race, competitive or better than all the runners in this race. Okay, the workouts were good. Hadn't run in a year. So with natural growth and maturity, my feel is that they're likely that would improve several numbers. So that's to me a major play every time. A lot of people say, well, let's give them a race. Let's give the horse a race. Well, if you give the horse a race and it runs well, then next time you're getting 2-1.
Right.
So when I see that, and I've hit horses that have paid 60-1 in the same situation, where hasn't run in a year, and people just lay off the horse and forget about the horse.
But your Horse
But
Player World
with
Series,
natural-
I think your Horse Player World Series big hit from 2 years ago, wasn't it, based on something like that?
Correct, exactly. It had run winning number in January and then was racing again. It was like a 4 or 5 month layoff, and the number that had last run was a winning number. And with a little growth, it would be a little better, and the horse will wide the field. And that was 60-1.
Another thing to look at with these layoff horses, another thing to look at is not only the specifics of the workouts. Obviously, if you can get a clocker report, all the better. But you'll see different meets have different characteristics too, and you'll see certain meets, horses will ship in from certain places and just do really well. I think typically it will be if they're training at a place that either has a more tiring track that they get fitness from, or in this case of Fair Hill, Maryland, and the Fair Hill Training Center, just the specifics of how that place is designed, with trainers having so many different options of hills to run horses up and all these different tracks. And the horses have been coming in from Fair Hill at this meet with just an incredible fitness edge. We saw in the last race of both contest days last weekend, a first-time starter coming in from Fair Hill and the Trombetta horse coming in from Fair Hill. If you have that extra bit of confidence to know these horses are going to be fit, and you've seen, I don't know why it seems to work that way in a given meet, that shippers from, I'm trying to think of some other good examples, but horses shipping in from Calder maybe at a Florida meet, or in the old days of Keeneland Synth, horses shipping in from Presque Isle. That you'll see these trends, and I don't know if you were looking at that, Paul or Scott, with the runner. Was it Light Up the Night, the name of the horse? But it to me is something that I pay attention to.
Well, I would say that if I'm looking at the PPs right now, so I can talk knowledgeably, but C's had run last November and ran a 70 buyer, and then in July when he came back, he ran an 85 buyer, and that was a 15-point improvement from 2-year-old to 3-year-old year, and that's why the horse was 2-1. If I had lost the contest, I would be kicking myself for betting on C's instead of Light the Night, because Light the Night was almost 7-1, and had been running just as fast as a 2-year-old,
right?
And even lost a stake race by a nose in November. So that horse is going to jump up. That's like the natural development. I totally agree with Paul on that. If the horse looks healthy, then it's probably improve. It's going to improve on that 2-year-old number. There's at least 6 months time, 8 months, 9 months between of growth periods. So in fact, the smart play for me, and this is why Paul is one of the best, is like, if I'm going to do that again, I'm going to crush. I'm going to put the 1,000 to win on Light the Night, and then do a $200 exact and back it up the other way, because there was much more value with Light the Night on top there, assuming that it was going to make the jump up.
I'll note too, that for me, a lot of it is how the trainer prepares a horse and whether they're ready to run in that first start. Like you said, Paul, sometimes people are inclined to give the horse a race. And some trainers, that's absolutely the case. With Trombetta, last 5 years, he's 21% with all horses coming off of a layoff of 6 months or more. And that's not a small sample size. It's 175 horses. Half of them hit the board. They're always square prices, or often square prices. So that tells me that a horse like that, who you're expecting potential improvement from, when the trainer also shows that they're able to get the horse ready to run for the first time in a while, that's the kind of thing that just gives you even more confidence, or at least it does for me.
Fair Hill Training Center, I'm telling you.
And Saratoga also, you have to remember, Saratoga is a big meet for all these trainers, and they're all prepping their horses to win at Saratoga. That's a big feather in their caps. So usually in a situation like this, the horse is usually ready to run because they want to win. They want to do all at Saratoga.
All right, folks, that's all the time we have for the show. I want to thank Mike Hogan. I want to thank Paul Shurman. I want to thank Scott F-Bomb Carson. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening. Keep those tweets coming. Hopefully you'll come see us doing our live show at Ciro's 10:45 on Saturday. Going to have a lot of fun over there. And we will be back before that also on Friday with another edition of the DRF Players Podcast. Until then, may you win all your photos.